Every month I make a list of all the albums I want to talk about for my anniversaries, and this year I'm doing albums that were released in 1990 or are celebrating 35 years. This was a very good year because I was buying a lot of metal music at that time. I had probably been listening to metal music for about 2 or 3 years. I think I was 19 years old. I came across an album I hadn't listened to in a long time. I had just forgotten how good it was. It's a thrash metal album. It came out before the Black Album. It was one of those albums that pushed the boundaries because it had elements of funk. There were a few acoustic ballads, and it was an overall solid album. It was the type of album that had to move at breakneck speeds at all times or be super heavy all throughout. The songs had a nice groove. There was a lot of aggression, but it wasn't aggression all the time. There were melodic songs, some clean singing. The band sounds a little different now than it did back then. Back then, there were a bunch of young guys. And I guess I'll tell you what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about Death Angels Act 3. Let me give you some background on the album first. This is their third studio album. It was released on April 10th, 1990 through Geffen Records. It is celebrating 35 years. It was produced by Max Norman and Tom Zutaut and recorded between September and October in 1989 at Dodge City Sound in Burbank, California. The album had a darker sound than the first two albums, but they also experimented a little more. But at the same time, they didn't completely abandon their thrash metal roots. The sound was more accessible and straightforward. Many people consider it to be their best album. As I said, these were young guys. This album saw the band maturing as songwriters and musicians. The album had Mark Ostigata on vocals, Rob Cavastani on lead guitars, Gus Pepper on rhythm guitar, also his last album with the band, Dennis Pepper on bass, and Andy Galean on drums. They did what seemed was like impossible at the time. They made an album that appealed to thrash fans, but also appealed to a broader audience. But the story does not have a happy ending, as the band broke up in 1991 after an unfortunate event, and I will get to that soon. First, I want to talk about how Act 3 compares to their other albums. It was definitely their most mature and diverse album up to that point. Many fans regard their debut album, The Ultraviolence, as one of the best debut albums in thrash. But if you compare the two albums, The Ultraviolence might be heavier, but Act 3 was more cohesive. You see, The Ultraviolence was a very raw thrash metal album, but then they released Frolic Through the Park, and on this album they played around with some other styles, but they didn't pull it off as well as they did on this album, Act 3. Their musicianship improved, Marco Segata's vocals sounded better, and the lead guitar work was more prominent on this album. The album had a very diverse sound. It had a mix of thrash and funk, and there were 2 soft ballads. So let's talk more about them. I'm going to start with the ballads. The first one I want to talk about is Veil of Deception.
Of a twisted mind, all virtues had faded away.
It's a very mellow acoustic track. It had some flamenco-inspired elements. I remember this song well because it was very unique. It sounded like folk rock or an early version of an acoustic grunge song, the kind that Alice in Chains would be doing later on. But there was another ballad, and this is the song I remember very well because I used to record songs off the radio with a boombox onto a cassette tape. Back then, I used to listen to a local college radio station that played metal music on the weekends. For those of you who grew up on Long Island in New York, you might know it. It was the CW Post radio station, 88.1, and that was where I used to find new music as there was no internet back then. But anyway, one day I'm taping songs and they play A Room with a View by Death Angel. And this was unlike any metal ballad I had heard at the time. It was very dark. It was a folky acoustic song. It had a very stripped down sound. It wasn't big and flashy with the electric guitar solos like a typical Poison or Bon Jovi ballad. It was mostly acoustic guitars. So it was one of those songs I had on this mixtape I used to play all the time. There were more songs. There were some songs that incorporated funk music, so let me talk about them. One of them was called Discontinued. This one reminded me a lot of the band Primus, but it still sounded like thrash. After that, there was a song called Stagnant. which also had some funk rock influences in addition to a groove metal sound. But despite the experimental tracks, there was still enough thrashers on the album just to keep everybody happy. So there was another song I remember hearing on the radio back then. It was the song Seemingly Endless Time. This was a fast-paced song with intricate riff work, and they had a video for this on MTV's Headbangers Ball, so I'm pretty sure I saw it there as well. There was a cool track called Stop that had aggressive riffs and a driving tempo. And another song called The Organization, a cool thrash metal song that had some catchy hooks. And by the way, the song title, The Organization, will come up later, so stay tuned for that. If you would like to become a member of this channel, for 99 cents you get early access to all my videos, and for $2.99 you get early access, plus you can request album reviews. There's a join button below or link in the video description. Let me talk about the recording process now. As it was a significant departure from their previous albums, this was the first time the band engaged in pre-production. Producer Max Norman flew to San Francisco to work with the band, and at first they went through a process of sorting out and dissecting the songs. Having a dedicated producer really paid off for the band. For example, Max Norman helped structure the songs. He made them more concise, they were more accessible. The band also learned to balance their improved musicianship with better songwriting. As I said before, they were just kids, so at first they didn't want to be guided by their management, but they eventually let the producers help the band, and it paid off in the end. Mixing took place in November 1989 at Skip Saylor Recording, Los Angeles, California. Afterwards, George Marino mastered the album at Sterling Sound in New York City. According to Mark Osegueda, he said the process was an eye-opening experience. He said that the band had to learn about song structures and the science of songwriting. In the end, the experience left a lasting impression on their approach to music. According to the guitarist Rob Cavestany, he said that the album helped them refine their songwriting. The band moved away from forcefully combining parts of songs that didn't seem to fit well with each other. In turn, songs became more structured and cohesive with the help of Max Norman and their talent scout. Not everything was smooth sailing. The band was facing an identity crisis. They struggled with defining their sound. They couldn't decide if they wanted to continue playing thrash metal or other genres such as funk and rock and roll. So for that reason, there were a lot of fans that did not like this new sound, as some of their older fans were thrash metal purists who don't like it when their bands play other styles. And you know the type of people I'm talking about, the ones who hate every Metallica album after And Justice for All, those types of metal fans. But not only that, they were also pressured by their label and producers. This was the first time the band was working with a major label. So they felt the pressure of having to produce an album that is going to sell. Fortunately, they had a good team to help out in the studio, but the band still had some creative tensions, as some of the band members had different visions of the album's direction. Because of this, some people didn't like the wide variety of styles used on the album. In the end, this album was a significant transition for the band's career as they moved away from the raw thrash sound to a more refined and diverse style, which led to additional challenges for the band. But the worst was yet to happen. In 1991, the band was in a tour bus accident, and it led to the band breaking up. The crash took place in Arizona while the band was touring in support of their album Act 3. Drummer Andy Galean sustained the worst injuries. He suffered head trauma and other injuries that required reconstructive surgery. As a result, he wasn't able to play for a long time afterwards, and that disrupted the band's tour schedule. Not only that, the band members went through some major emotional distress, as well as financial problems as the medical bills started to pile up. Not only that, but the tour had to be canceled. This led to the band breaking up. Now, the band would reunite in 2001, but back in 1991, the band went their separate ways for the most part. There was a side project, and that was a band called The Organization, named after the aforementioned song. The band was formed by Rob Cavestany, Andy Galean, Dennis Pepper, and Gus Pepper. After Death Angel disbanded, and Mark Osegueda didn't want to join this new project. He just wanted to pursue other interests outside of music during that time. The band was not a thrash band. They played a mix of funk metal, heavy metal, and alternative rock, and They released 2 albums through Metal Blade. One was a self-titled in 1993, and another one, Savor the Flavor, in 1995. And the band was only active for that period. They broke up in 1995. Like I said, the story has a happy ending. They got back together in 2001. They also released 2 albums in the 2000s, then another 4 in the 2010s, and I would like to say they are due for another one, as their last album, Humanicide, was released in 2019. That album earned them a Grammy nomination, which is pretty impressive for an old-school thrash band. Supposedly, they're working on a new album. They have about 6 or 7 songs completed so far. They were hinting at releasing a double album inspired by Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti. That's really all I know. Some sources say a potential 2025 release. Nothing is definite. I haven't heard anything. And we all know Marco Segeda was involved with the Kerry King band, but he says he's also still part of Death Angel. So we'll probably get something eventually. At this point in the video, I usually direct you to another video that I reviewed for this band, but this is my first review for Death Angel, so let me direct you to my ranking of the band Forbidden. They also released an album around the same time as Act 3, which was Twisted into Form, a really great album. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. Give the video a like, helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe if you have not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.